Hi guys, welcome to Alienation. I hope you're all having an amazing day so far. If you are new here, my name is Megan and I sit down every single Sunday to talk about some form of weird and not so wonderful topic that really interests me. So today's topic, similar to last week, again, is a little bit different to what I would usually cover, but it really interests me, so I'm definitely very excited for today's episode. It is still equally as strange and equally as bizarre as some of the other topics I do cover, but today I'm going to be telling you all about a young boy called Cameron Macauley, otherwise known as the boy who lived before. Some of you might have heard about this, some of you might not, but I'm sure you have all heard about the phenomenon of reincarnation, or children who have memories of past lives. I find it so fascinating, and as I was researching this, I was so shocked to find just how many cases there are similar to Cameron's, where they're all children who have all of these past memories. They believe they've been reincarnated, they believe they've lived before. It is so crazy. Obviously children do have very wild imaginations, but when there is some kind of proof or fact behind these stories or these memories, it just blows my mind. So let's get into today's story. So Cameron Macauley is a young boy from Glasgow. I am unsure as to how old he would be now, but when his case, I say in air quotations, was documented, I believe he was around 5 years old at the time. But Cameron lives with his mum Norma and his older brother Martin, and Cameron was pretty much a typical young boy. He was really happy, he was carefree, really playful, didn't have a care in the world. However, since around the age of 2 years old, when Cameron first learned to speak, he started to talk about an entire different life that he apparently had lived. So Cameron would talk all about this other life, and he'd claim that he lived on a small Scottish island called Barra. It's a pretty small and remote island, but it is a really beautiful place, and it wasn't that far away from where he lived now. And he would talk all about his Barra mum and dad, his Barra brothers and sisters, and he would even talk about his Barra dog, which was a black and white sheepdog as far as I'm aware. So not only would he talk about his Barra family, he would also talk about the house in which he grew up. He would constantly tell his family that it was this big white house that was on the beach, and how from the house he could sit there and he could watch all the planes landing on the beach. But weirdly enough, Cameron had never been to Barra in his life. Neither had his mother or any of his family members, and Barra wasn't something or a place that they would talk about ever. So it kind of made no sense as to how Cameron, one, knew of Barra, and two, was getting all these memories and recalling all these events that he had apparently lived through, especially at such a young age. But as Cameron got older, his memories, I say in air quotations, got more and more clearer and even more detailed. But the actual story of his life never actually changed. He was from Barra, he had a completely different Barra family, and he was just recalling more memories as he got older. So it was becoming clearer and clearer to Norma that this wasn't just a case of a child with a really wild imagination, and that there was something more to this. And this became even more apparent as Cameron was getting really distressed over this. He was getting sad, he was really upset, and he was missing his other family. So Norma was at a bit of a loss as to what to do about this, because no parent wants to see their child upset, but what are you supposed to do about a child who claims they have had a life before you? And it must have been so hard for her to hear this, because picture having a child, raising that child, it being your child, and that child constantly telling you about his other mum, his other family that he loved. You'd be pretty devastated, wouldn't you? So like I said, as he grew up, he was starting to talk more and more about different details of his past life, and he even spoke about his father. And he would talk about how his Barra dad was called Shane Robertson, and he would even recall that his Barra dad didn't look left or right, and he'd been knocked over and killed, which is a very bizarre thing for such a young child to say. But he would just reel these stories off over and over again, and they would always be consistent. How on earth did he have all of these apparent memories? It made no sense. And he would obviously talk about his Barra mum and how much he missed her, and he'd say things like, oh, she used to have really long hair and then she cut it off short. It's just insane the amount of detail that this kid used to talk about. So Norma decided to look into this a little bit further, because it was clearly causing her son a bit of distress. She was probably very confused, so she wanted to investigate to see if there was more to this story. So she chose to visit Dr. Chris French, who was a psychologist who actually debunked paranormal phenomenon. So obviously he claimed he was just a child with an overactive imagination. He said, oh, he's probably just seen it on TV, he's probably heard it from a family member, a friend. But Norma was adamant that that just wasn't the case. None of the family had ever been, no one would tell him these sort of stories. stories. She also said that anything he watched on TV, he usually watched when she was there, and she can't recall any form of memory of ever watching anything that mentioned Barra or seeing anything that had any form of information like this that Cameron would have picked up and kept in his mind. It just didn't make any sense. So Norma then went on to visit someone called Karen Majors. Karen was an educational psychiatrist who specialised in children and their fantasy lives. Again, I say in air quotations, which basically means like their dream state or things like imaginary friends, anything like that. So things that aren't quite real, but that children play along with. And she stated that apparently Cameron's past life didn't fit in with any of the cases that she'd ever come across before. Most children seem to know that their imaginary friends are exactly that, imaginary, but Cameron was so invested in his stories and deeply believed that these things that he was remembering were actual solid memories and that there was fact to that, and it wasn't imaginary, it was all very real to Cameron. So once again, Norma had no answers. So she then decided to meet Dr. Jim Tucker, who was a child psychiatrist. Dr. Tucker was also a director of a specific program at the University of Virginia, so obviously in the States, where they specialized in researching specific cases and accounts of children who apparently had past life memories. And finally, Norma actually felt like someone was taking her seriously, someone was maybe able to give her some form of answer. So he, along with Norma, Cameron and Martin, decided it was finally time to take a trip to Barra. One of the things that Cameron used to talk about was how he ended up in this life. He would say he basically fell through a hole of some sort. It was like a dark tunnel. He found himself falling and then it all just went dark, and then next thing he knew, he woke up in this life. And that's how he ended up leaving his Barra mum and finding his new mum. And that little detail is something that is very, very common in a lot of these cases. A lot of these children who apparently have these reincarnation memories seem to have gone through a very similar experience where there's some form of dark tunnel or they have fallen into darkness and then it's like being reborn again because they were reborn. So this is basically what the doctor and Norma wanted to look into. Was he really from Barra? Did he have a family back there? Or was this just a really very strange wild imagination and scenario that he had created? But so far they have a place, they have Barra, it's a real place, they can go and visit it. They also have a description of this apparent house that he grew up in. It was a white one-story beach house, and from that beach house you can look out and you can see the planes landing on the beach. And finally they also had a name, Shane Robertson, who Cameron believes was his Barra dad, and that he always wore shirts and he had spiky hair. Off they went to Barra to start their investigation. Norma was a little bit worried about how Cameron was going to react. I mean, any parent would. It's a very strange situation. She was concerned that he might be disappointed if it wasn't what he had remembered, but he was really, really excited to be going, and he kept saying he cannot wait to go home. Bearing in mind, like I said, Norma, any of the children, any of the family had ever actually visited Barra. So as they were on the plane there, because they had to fly there because it was an island, and as they started to descend, guess what happened? Their plane wasn't descending onto a normal airplane or airport runway, it was descending onto a beach. And if you remember, like I said, Cameron used to watch the planes landing on the beach, which was a pretty interesting start to their trip. That must have just been so crazy for Norma to have seen. Just to confirm one small detail of Cameron's story is mind-blowing. Cameron was obviously thrilled by this and he was super, super excited and kept saying to his brother, see, I told you it was true. I told you I wasn't lying. And he kept saying that he really recognized the beach and he sort of recognized everything that was going on around him, which again is very interesting. He was super, super happy to be back and he was pointing at everything saying, oh, I remember when we used to go there. If you go over this bit, you're going to find this, blah, 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 all different things like that. It was literally like he was recalling a place he knew very, very well. And as they were driving to the hotel, they were able to get a little bit of a look at the island. And Cameron was saying things like, oh, we might actually be able to see my house. So anyway, while they were there, Norma and Dr. Tucker headed to the local heritage centre. And this was in hopes of finding anything that could help them out, see if they could find any form of proof of this family that used to live on the island, or if there was just any form of record of his Barra dad or mum or the house that he was recalling. But sadly, they did come away empty-handed. There was no record of a Robertson family that lived in a beach house on the island. So instead, they decided to do a little bit of a drive around of the island and see if they could find some form of white house that Cameron might recognise. But again, sadly, they didn't have much luck. Cameron saw a few of the white houses, but he didn't recognise any of them as his home. And so far, there wasn't any proof, apart from the planes landing on the beach, that Cameron's story was legit. Until the next day when they received a very interesting phone call. So the local heritage centre had obviously done a little bit more digging and they had some news for Norma. On the north of the island sat a white house on the beach, which was owned at one point by a family called the Robinsons. So originally they didn't find any records because they weren't any records, because the Robinson family weren't actually locals and they only held records for the locals from the island. And it turns out the Robinson family were actually from the mainland and they used to use this house as a holiday home. So Norma, being completely mind blown, she was obviously taken aback by this, but the time in which the family were there and used to holiday there matched everything Cameron used to say, because they figured out, I think it was around the 70s or 80s, I could be completely wrong, which was around the time that Cameron was there in this past life, and it matched. Everything was starting to add up. So off they rushed to that address to see, one, if it's still there, two, if it was the right house, and three, I don't even know. I don't know what they were thinking. They just rushed on down there. As they were heading there, it obviously took them on a different route and down a different road and path than the one that they had originally been on when they were looking at houses. So obviously any houses down this road they hadn't seen yet. And they chose not to tell Cameron that they'd potentially found this house because they didn't want to influence his thoughts or sort of put ideas in his mind. They just headed there and didn't say anything. So when they finally laid eyes on the house, Cameron's reaction was unexpected. He just wasn't his normal self. Like I said at the start, he was really bubbly, he was this really happy, chatty little boy, and he just went super quiet and withdrawn. He got a little bit sad, he got a little bit upset, and it just wasn't the reaction that Norma and the doctor were expecting. But it was a perfect match. There was this little gate and it had a little path that would lead down to sort of the rock pools and the beach at the bottom. Cameron had described that perfectly. He knew exactly where it was. The rock pools, the beach, everything matched everything that Cameron had described. So they went into the house. Cameron was giving off a little tour. He'd say things like, this is where the girls all slept, this is where me and the boys all slept. And he did say that some things were different because since then the house had been modernised, it had been redecorated, but overall the layout of the house was pretty much the same. It was just like Cameron had described. It's just so bizarre. I honestly don't know what Norma must have been thinking in this situation, to have spent years of her life listening to her son talk about this past life and then seeing it all unfold in front of her. That's just insane to me. So Cameron was a little bit sad. He said he wasn't expecting his mum and his other family to be there, but he did still really miss them. But overall, he was very happy that he did get to go to Barra. So they finished their trip and they headed on back home to Glasgow. And while they were back home, researchers had managed to track down one of the Robertson family that had owned the house. Her name was Jilly Robertson and she fitted everything about the story. She had the same name. She would have holidayed in the home at around the time they were expecting Cameron's memories to be from, so they decided to go and meet her. Sadly, Jilly couldn't tell them anything about a Shane Robertson in particular. She did say that she had an uncle called James or Seamus, so there could have potentially been a mix-up with names there, but no one in the family had passed away at the time. She wasn't aware of any car accidents or anyone being knocked down, but she was able to confirm some other details from Cameron's story. So she had a bunch of different photos and they were flicking through it. She let obviously Cameron have a look to see if he could sort of pick anything out or if anything matched his story, and quite a lot did. There was a specific car that Cameron had talked about, and there it was in the photos, along with the photos of the black and white sheepdog. So Jilly had said that there was a couple that had owned the house and they had a black and white sheepdog, and there were photos of this dog in her photo album. So yeah, it's just insane. A lot of Cameron's so-called memories were fitting with everything that they were finding, but at the same time, some of the details weren't, like the situation with his apparent Barra father. So is it possible that the couple that owned this house and also owned this dog were Cameron's family, and that the Robertson family would holiday there and Cameron would play with the family and had all these memories with the family because of that? I honestly have no idea. But either way, after the family had returned home and the meeting with Jilly, Cameron pretty much laid his past Barra life to rest. It was almost like he'd got a confirmation that he needed and he was now at peace with this and he could just move on. He stopped talking about it. If you would ask him about it, he'd say, oh yeah, I was from Barra, but now I'm from here. It was like he was a lot calmer about the idea. He no longer needed to prove it to his own family or convince anyone it was real, and he just moved on with his life. And that is basically it. It's absolutely fascinating to me. It really, really is. And there are so many cases similar to Cameron's where children have past life memories, and a lot of it's not proved. Obviously, you can't prove someone's been reincarnated, but the detail that some of these kids talk about is insane. It really, really is. Could it be like another timeline, or people jumping dimensions? Is reincarnation real? Was Cameron reborn? Honestly, who knows? You'll have to let me know what you think down below. It doesn't make sense, but it also makes sense to me, is if that couple that owned the dog maybe had a son in this life or in another life, another dimension, and he's mixing up these memories with this other family because he spent a lot of time with them when they would holiday there. It would make sense if he had an accident, passed away, and then was reborn into another life. I have no idea, but it is insane. It really does interest me. And like I said, there are so many stories, so you'll just have to let me know if you'd like me to do more. But that is actually everything, and this was episode 20. How on earth has another 10 episodes been done already? It blows my mind. Like last time, after I did 10 episodes, I will be having a break. I will be back, don't worry, but I just want to say I do have other dedications going on in my life right now, so there is a slight chance that there won't be as many episodes. I'm really, really sorry. So I'm hopefully only going to have maximum 2 weeks off, because this takes up a lot of time. I absolutely adore creating my Alienation series, but it does take a lot of time. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I haven't been covering that many intense true crime cases lately because I just haven't had the time. So I will be taking a very short break, and I will hopefully be back soon. But there is also an odd chance that instead of doing an episode a week, I might have to change up my schedule a bit and do maybe every other week or a couple of weeks then miss one, which I'm so sorry about to any of you who do watch or listen to this every single week, but please just bear with me. It won't be like this forever, but I just want to say a huge thank you to any of you who have tuned in each week, or you've watched or listened to all 20 episodes. Thank you so much. It means the world. But I'm going to leave it there for today, and I will catch you in a couple weeks time. But if you are watching on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. Please give it a massive thumbs up, leave me a comment down below, and subscribe if you are not. And if you are listening on podcast streaming services, thank you so much to you guys as well. Please rate, review, share, do whatever you can to help spread the word. All of my social media is in the description of each episode, so if you want to catch me over there, feel free. But thank you guys again, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye!